Good morning, Newman University, and everybody in the surrounding area. Listen, 98.5 WNUW, LP Aston. My name is Joe Tusio, and can I just say that this Sunday matchup was almost like a dream. And in some ways, over the past few weeks, everybody knows the Eagles have, I don't even know how to put it into words, how they played the last few weeks. And going into this game, I will even admit to my own self, I had no confidence at all that the Eagles could win this game. I thought this was going to be another 35-10 loss. I thought Tom Brady was just going to put up monster numbers, even though he didn't have Gronkowski and Edelman. But I had no confidence in the Eagles winning this game. And it's not because the Eagles don't have the talent to win the game. It's just that I didn't know where this team was going at this point. I didn't know if the confidence in Chip Kelly was still there. I didn't know if it was the team in some ways giving up. I didn't know how the fans thought. It's just hard to put a finger on where this team was. And I thought this was going to be the point where maybe the Eagles are deciding that they need to rebuild, that this year's done, that the rest of the games that they have left, they're virtually probably going to be an underdog for most of the games. And this game, I thought, was just an easy loss. I had no faith. And coming into it, when the game first started, I was surprised. I mean, surprised is an easy way to put it, because watching that game was a stunning upset. Maybe the biggest upset of the entire year. Unless a 2-10 team beats like the Panthers or some team like that. But right now, that's probably the biggest upset of this year. And especially considering how they did it. And that is by defense and special teams. Tom Brady, most can argue, is maybe the best quarterback of all time. And for the Eagles to play the way they did against him was sort of a breath of fresh air, you can say, regardless of how they're playing throughout these first 10, 11, 12 games. Because over the first 3 or 4 games, the defense was the reason why they were still in. Even though they lost, their defense was the bright spot. And over these last two or three games, giving up 30, 40 points to teams that were arguably not as good as them, record-wise, and where they were in the standings. For them to play the way they did in this game maybe shows that, at least defensively, they have the talent to win games. And on the offensive side of the ball, it's still one of those tricky gray areas because they have some talent still, but they just can't put it together. And when I watch the offensive side of the ball, Bradford, at least from what I can tell, looks more comfortable playing. The first 5-6 games, he looked somewhat scared. He looked like he wasn't confident to make every throw. Maybe that's because he was coming off injuries throughout the last 3 or 4 years when he was with the Rams. But in this game, he looked more confident. He was standing in the pocket, making every throw, or at least a majority of the throws that he could make. And he didn't have a huge game. He didn't have 400 yards, didn't have 5 scores. Offensively, they didn't put up 500 yards of offense. But Bradford at least looked more comfortable running that offense. And that's a big thing, at least going forward, if Chip Kelly or the team decides maybe Bradford's our guy, maybe we need to get more wide receivers and weapons for him. Maybe we just need to adjust the entire scheme to build it around him. Who knows? But the way that he played is at least a bright spot, at least considering since the way he's been playing the first 10 games. And each week, it looks like he's getting at least a little bit better each week. They may not be winning games, but he's at least looking better each week. And another thing that was interesting watching that offense on the field was that DeMarco Murray, which I don't know why. I for the life of me, I cannot understand or comprehend why why the plays he makes just result in 0 yards or not that many yards. I believe at one point he was at 6 carries for like less than 10 yards. That is shocking for a guy that was last year maybe the best running back in the entire NFL. And for a guy to come out and play like that, maybe it's just the entire scheme. He can't run these sideline to sideline sweep plays. It's just not going to work for a guy like him. When Kenyon Barner and Darren Sproles are playing, they're getting 5-6 yards each carry. And I'm not saying that Kenyon Barner in any sense has to be the starting running back for this team. But it shows that the style of play that he plays in this scheme is what Chip Kelly needs. I get it. A north-south big power back is a great guy to have when it's 3rd and 2 and you can run it right up the middle and get those 2-3 yards. But for a scheme that runs sideline to sideline, a power back doesn't seem like that's the right type of player to have on this team. Now, can DeMarco Murray maybe adjust to that and maybe change his game too to work with the scheme? I don't know. But if you want to keep DeMarco Murray as your main back, maybe you have to just do some simple I-formation runs where Murray can run right up the middle, whatever holes the offensive line can open up for him. Maybe that's the route that they need to go. Instead of doing these sweep plays where he has to juke his way out of a defender's tackle to try to gain yards. Because it seems like right now that may not be working. And it was so important because over the last 10 games, probably the entire year, everybody said that Darren Sproles needed to get more carries. Whether he caught it, whether he ran it. And he did in this game, and it shows how important he is to this scheme. A guy that can catch the ball 5-6 times, can get the ball 10 to 15 times. You don't have to put him in for 40 snaps and run the ball to him every play. But if he can at least get a couple touches, can catch the ball when it's a 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, that's important to have on this scheme, especially considering the lack of talent at wide receiver that they have right now. And another thing that's important to understand is the tight end position on this scheme is important. And it's not just a blocking tight end. It's not just a Brent Selleck. But Zach Ertz shows that when you're 1st and goal, 2nd and goal, you can throw it to a guy like him. And when you have a big tight end who can catch, a Gronk, Eifert, Ertz, these are guys that make catches in the end zone all the time. And that's why they are important to the teams that they are on. If Tyler Eifert was not on the Bengals right now, their offense may not be as efficient as it is. If Gronk was out like he was, you can see how the Patriots have to adjust their offense for one guy. So it's important to understand how one offensive player can change an entire scheme. I'm not saying one player is going to win you or lose you a game, but if your one player is your best offensive or best defensive player, you're going to have to adjust. And that's important to understand, especially since Ertz was out with an injury, and now that he's back, the offense looks at least a little bit better. Now, at this stage in the game, with the Eagles being 5-7, this is where the discussion comes to a point about whether the Eagles still have a chance to get a wild card spot or even a division title just because the NFC East is weak right now. This is where not just the Eagles, but fans, media, whoever watches this team or the NFL, this is where the decision has to come down about whether or not the Eagles can fight through, win out, get a wild card spot, or just a playoff spot, or if this is a time where they need to look at the draft. Because this is a team where they definitely have holes on this roster right now. This isn't a team where it has maybe one need and that's it. And this isn't a team where they have $60 million in cap space. And this isn't a free agent class where there's 10 stars. And this isn't a draft class where there's a quarterback that's an Andrew Luck type of guy. So this is where the decision has to come down. And in order for that decision to be made, it's important to look at the Eagles' remaining schedule down the road. Now, they have the Buffalo Bills, which is a tough team, especially considering that their running back right now was a former Eagles player, and he kind of knows what Chip Kelly's offense is sort of like, and he knows how the defense can kind of play, so it might give the Bills a little bit of an advantage right now, and they're not a bad team. They're still up there in terms of having a shot. The Arizona Cardinals are another team that the Eagles have to play, and that is kind of like a Patriots game where I'm not necessarily going to count them out, but it's going to be tough. It's not an easy win, and it's not a huge loss. If they can win, they're going to have to control Carson Palmer's throws, and they're going to have to get help from their offense, especially considering that the Cardinals' defense right now is pretty good. They also play the Redskins, who right now have the lead in the NFC East. Not by much, but they still have a lead. So it's going to be, and Kirk Cousins right now is at least playing decent. He's not lighting the world on fire. He's not a Pro Bowl type player right now, but he's the guy that can at least win games for him. And one of the last games they play is the New York Giants. One of those teams where at this point in the year, they usually like to start on a roll, get into the playoffs. They did it in previous years where they won Super Bowls. So that's a team that you can't just put as an automatic win. So if they can win 3 out of their last 4 games, go 8-8, they have a shot, especially considering how the NFC in general is kind of top. It's kind of bottom heavy in a sense because there's only really probably 2 or 3 great teams, and then the rest are kind of in the middle. Right now, the Eagles are 5-7. There are probably 4 or 5 other teams that are 5-7, and there are probably 4 or 5 other teams who are 4-8. So if you're looking for a draft pick, you can go anywhere from probably 7 to probably 18. Because there's probably going to be a lot of teams with an 8-8, 7-9, 9-7 record at this point. So if you're going for the draft pick, if you're at least scouting for the top draft pick, you at least have to understand that at this point, they're in a crowded middle of the draft. So if you're looking at quarterback, let's say you're looking at a Paxton Lynch or a Jared Goff, you're probably not going to get them if you win the rest of your games. And if you're looking for a top defensive player, a Bosa, Jalen Ramsey, that's probably not going to happen either because those are top 10 talent guys. So one of the things to consider also is that if this team wants to make a run, do they have the talent to win a playoff game once they get there? And in my opinion, when I look at it, I think they have talent, but I don't know if they can put that talent all the way through to being a playoff winning team. I think that their wide receiver position is a little weak right now. I think they need to, and it's not even that they're weak in a sense of they don't have any talent at all, because they have a couple guys that can make plays, but they're not living up to that hype. They don't have that true number one guy. They don't have that Calvin Johnson, Odell Beckham, DeAndre Hopkins type of guy. And their quarterback right now is a question mark because we don't really know what he is yet. We don't know if he's going to be that franchise guy that they're going to sign to a 5-year deal, or if he's just a stopgap guy that can be here for maybe 1 or 2 years when they groom a young guy. It's the rest of this year is going to hinge on whether or not they get a good draft pick or if they get a good wild card spot. Because this is a question mark team. There are teams in the NFL who you know aren't going to make the playoffs. You know there are teams in the NFL who are going to be number 1, number 2 seeds. And then you have the gray area. Teams that like the Eagles, the Bears, the Dolphins, the Bills. Teams that they have talent to make the playoffs, but they're probably not going to win a Super Bowl. But at the same time, I don't think any fan in any sport around the world is going to root for a team to lose out. I know in some sports, the 76ers right now are trying to build for the future to get a Ben Simmons type of guy. And while that's true, I don't think any fan is going into every single game saying, yes, I want us to lose by 30 because we're going to get Ben Simmons. He's the prophet. He's the guy that's going to get us the NBA title. Yeah, his talent may be there, but I'm not going into every game saying, I can't wait to lose. These games are just so exciting. I can't wait to lose. We're going to go 0-82 or 1-81. That's not going to happen regardless of what team, what league, what sport. Now, if you do want a good draft pick, maybe your expectations for the games aren't going to be as high as if you wanted a playoff berth. If you're hoping that the Eagles go 9-7, you want them to just crush the remaining teams. You want them to show that they have heart. You want them to show that they have control of their own destiny at this point. But if you want a good draft pick, you're not necessarily going to root for them to lose, because that's not really what I'm not going to say that's not what a real fan is, because each fan is different depending on your perspective of the team and how they are and what the organization is doing. But your expectations are just going to be lower. You're just going to say, I think we could win, but I don't expect us to win. So, if you honestly root for your team to lose every single game, that's on you. I'm not going to judge, because I'm not in the right place for me to do that. But it's important to understand that while being an 8-8, 9-7 team is great, and maybe you can make some tremendous playoff run where maybe you can win a Super Bowl somehow, that's great. But if you know that this team does not have the talent or the record to make that Super Bowl run, I think it would be important to look at free agency and draft. And not necessarily thinking, man, I can't wait to get Paxton Lynch. He's going to be the next Tom Brady because we're going to have a top 3 pick. No. Now, there are certain teams right now who are the worst record in the NFL. The Browns, Chargers, Titans. These teams who have the bottom records, they right now are looking at the draft. Because now, in no ways am I saying that these fans are rooting for their team to lose. But when your team's 2-10 or 2-11, you kind of know that you're not going to make a playoff run. So you look towards the draft. And that's where the Eagles are in this gray area, because this year is so interesting, because if you're 5-7 3 or 4 years back, you probably already know you're not going to make a playoff berth, because there were probably 4 or 5 teams that were winning records, that were 9-3 or 8-4 or 7-5. So this year is definitely interesting in terms of where teams can make a playoff run, and especially because there's a lot of teams that exactly have the same record as the Eagles. But also because the divisions right now, a lot of divisions are weak. The NFC East does not have a powerhouse team. Yes, the Redskins right now have sole control of the NFC East, but they're not a 10-0, 11-0, 12-0 team. They're barely better than the Eagles record-wise. Talent-wise, they may be matched. So to sit here and say that the Eagles, in terms of record and doing the math, yes, the Eagles mathematically still have a chance, as do a lot of teams. But is the confidence there? Is the confidence in saying we can make a run because we're that good? Is that there? I don't know. I don't know. So it's going to be interesting to see where this team falls the remaining 4 games. If the Eagles don't win a majority of their games, and if they land with, let's say, a pick from anywhere from 10 to 15, maybe even they get into the top 7 somehow, it's important to understand where the holes on the team are and what they need to address, especially since they have no second-round pick. So they need to be conservative, and they need to address their needs carefully. So this isn't a draft where you can just throw away your draft picks, because there are some teams that have more than 7 picks. They have 8, 9, 10 picks. So if you make one mistake, okay, you can maybe make up for it with an additional pick. But at this point, the Eagles will hit less than 7 picks, or even if they just had regular 7 picks, they need to carefully make each pick and make a good pick. So it all depends on where they want to go. I think with Aguilar taken in the first round, I don't know if you can necessarily go wide receiver again in the first round. And it's all depending on who's there. If there's a top quarterback gone, if there's 2 or 3 top defensive players gone, and a guy like Laquan Treadwell from Ole Miss is there, then maybe you got to take a chance on him. Because right now he's probably the best wide receiver in this class. And it's not one of those classes where it's Amari Cooper, Kevin White, and then the rest of the wideouts. It's Laquan Treadwell, and then the next, the second and third guys are kind of close to him, but they wouldn't be considered a top 10 or 15 pick. So if they want to address the wide receiver spot in the draft, Laquan Treadwell is probably the way that you go, especially considering that there aren't a slew of free agent wideouts out there. Alshon Jeffrey is a name that's going to be out there, but I don't see how Chicago lets him go, especially considering that Brandon Marshall's gone, Kevin White's not playing yet, so you don't know what you have in a guy like him. And Alshon Jeffrey, quite frankly, just makes that offense as good as it can possibly be. So with the cap room that they have and with the help of other needs that they need in free agency in the draft, Alshon Jeffrey's probably not going to leave unless some team gives him a crazy contract that Chicago just doesn't want to match. So maybe wide receiver is where they need to go. I know one spot, and I think any Eagles fan or any fan that watches the Eagles in general can agree with that offensive line is probably their number 1 need, and probably their number 2 need, and probably their number 3 need. Jason Peters is getting old. Their offensive line is struggling right now. And there are going to be a lot of good offensive linemen in this year's draft. There's going to be some pretty good guards. There are 3 great tackles in this year's draft. I think 2 of them are going to be taken in the top 10, with a third who's going to be a first-round pick but isn't as good as the first 2. I think Laramie Tensel and Ronnie Stanley are probably going to go in the top 10, depending on who's there. I think a Taylor Decker from Ohio State will be a good pick because he's a guy that can play on the right side, left side. You can move Lane Johnson over to the left tackle if Decker gets taken with the first round. He's a guy that can move all along the offensive line and who's a first-round talent at this point, and you need offensive linemen. So if you wanted to go offensive line, I don't think you can really... I'm not going to say you can mess up because offensive linemen in the draft now is kind of like a hit and miss because you have guys that are seen as a franchise tackle and don't live up to the hype, or you have guys that are taken as a wild card in the first round and turn out to be an all-pro. So if you need offensive line that bad and there's really no other superstars out there, but there's a great left or right tackle out there, Eagles probably got to go with that. But it all depends on if he can fit on Chip Kelly's scheme, if he is right for Chip Kelly in terms of on the field, off the field, regardless of what his talent is. If it doesn't fit the team, maybe you don't make that pick then. But if Taylor Decker or Ronnie Stanley are there, you definitely got to go that route if you're going to go offensive lineman. And it goes for the defensive side too. They need help on defense, and there's no one set pick. There's no one set spot. I don't know if it's like secondary. I know they're going to need help in inside linebacker. Jordan Hicks looks like a future Pro Bowl player, a guy that could probably be the captain of this defense, sort of what D'Amico Ryans was when he was with the Texans years back. So I think maybe you can go inside linebacker. Jalen Smith looks like a stud at inside linebacker. A guy that can be a Luke Kuechly, C.J. Mosley type of guy that would complement Jordan Hicks very well. And he's a guy that can play outside and can blitz, so he gives you that extra dimension in terms of being able to blitz inside, outside. He can cover wide receivers, tight ends. He's got speed. He needs to bulk up, but other than that, he looks like a stud inside linebacker, and that's rare to find, especially in the top 10 in the draft now. If they want to go outside linebackers, that's another spot. Barwin and Brandon Graham are two. There are two good starters on this team, and in this last game, Brandon Graham and Connor Barwin both stepped up and made some very good plays. But you can't put them in every single snap. They're going to need the rest, especially if the Eagles' offense runs like it does and runs a quick, fast-paced offense where the defense might be out there for more plays. You're going to need a guy that can come in and make plays when Brandon Graham or Connor Barwin are on the side. And you kind of wanted that out of Marcus Smith. And I know Marcus Smith may be a bust. Marcus Smith may be he may not be reaching his full potential or the ceiling that they wanted him to be at. Fine. But if you need outside linebacker help, you're going to need to maybe look at one in the draft. And these are all the guys I'm naming are first-round picks. So the Eagles don't have 5 first-round picks. I'm not saying that they can get all of these guys. But these are guys that they at least have to look at in terms of moving forward with the future next year. You know, a guy like Leonard Floyd is a pretty good outside linebacker right now. Is a guy that he has speed, he has power, he can play outside, inside. He can probably play defensive end if you really need him to. Kind of like that Von Miller type guy in terms of his play. Not of how good he is, but in terms of his play. That's going to be very important. And you can always use help at cornerback spot. Granted, Maxwell's there now. They put in their second-round pick. He's not too bad. He needs to improve and get his feet. You know, he needs to just learn to play the game more. To be quite honest here, he just hasn't played enough to be considered a starter every single day yet. So, I mean, they need help at outside linebacker, wide out, offensive line, and quarterback. But I don't know if there's a quarterback worthy of taking in the first round that can play the Chip Kelly scheme. I know Paxton Lynch might be able to, but it's 6'7", 240 pounds. That's going to be hard for a guy to run a read option. I don't think a Joe Flacco or a Tom Brady or a Peyton or like a Peyton Manning is going to run a read option anytime soon. I think Paxton Lynch is a more mobile guy than those guys I just named, but I don't know if he can run the read option that Chip Kelly actually wants. And a guy that I really like is Trayvon Boykin out of TCU. That's a guy that you don't need to get him in the first round. You can maybe get him in the third round, maybe, depending on if a team wants him at that high. If you can get him in the third round, he's a guy that can play sort of like an RG3. Sort of like an RG3. I'm not saying he's going to be at that level. But if you can get him at the third round, groom him for a year or two, depending on if Bradford's going to be there, that might be the guy that can run Chip Kelly's scheme. And that's also if Chip Kelly stays. But if you're going with this coaching staff, with this team right now, you probably have to go with Boykin, or even if like a Hackenberg falls in the second round, or even though the Eagles don't have a second round, they could probably still trade up. I don't think he's going to get out of the first round, just because I think his talent is a lot better than the way he's playing right now. Now, I just went through a bunch of guys that they can get in the draft. But everybody knows that free agency comes first. And there are a lot of guys in free agency at this point that I think could be great assets to this Eagles team. And it's kind of difficult because this isn't the draft class, or this isn't the free agent classes that were around years back, where there's 5 or 6 superstar players that we know are going to leave. Because a lot of them right now are technically a free agency because their contracts are up after this year. But a lot of them might be re-signed. A guy like a Von Miller at this point. I don't see how Von Miller leaves that team. Especially considering he might be maybe the best outside linebacker in the NFL. I mean, if he were to leave, you're going to have teams just throwing money at him. $100 million deal. Sue, Houston, these type of guys that are getting these big deals are setting the bar for guys like Von Miller. Muhammad Wilkerson is another guy that I think the Eagles could look at. Played at Temple, so he has a local feel. He knows what it's like to play in this area. He can play at a position of need. You got Fletcher Cox on one side. Cedric Thornton isn't too bad, but he's not a superstar. If you can get Wilkerson and Fletcher Cox as your 2 interior defensive linemen with Benny Logan playing at the nose, you got some. That's a pretty good 3-down lineman. That might be the best 3-down lineman in the NFL if that were to actually happen, but I don't necessarily see that happening at this point. And there's a couple guys that can make plays. Tamba Hali is another guy. Now, this guy, granted, he's over 30, so you're not going to get him in his prime, but he's a guy that can still make plays if you get him on a 2 or 3 year deal, and he can be a rotational piece when Brandon Graham or Connor Barron comes out. And another guy that I particularly like, that I believe is still on his rookie deal, so you're not going to have to throw $100 million at him at this point, is Courtney Upshaw, who is, and I know, Joe, who is that guy? I've never even heard of that guy. Yeah, I know. I tend to throw out guys that not a lot of people really like to know, because I like these underrated guys that are given these smaller, medium deals that can turn out to be a really good player. An example is Pernell McPhee last year, who was signed by the Bears. A guy who wasn't given a $100 million deal. Nobody saw him as a superstar Von Miller, Justin Houston type of outside linebacker. Came in and is right now a captain on the Bears, and is probably a cornerstone piece on that defense right now. So, if you can at least get a rotational guy on a decent deal, that helps the team all the better. And Sean Smith is another guy, a cornerback for the Chiefs, a guy who has length, who has size, who was with the Dolphins, who plays with Andy Reid right now. They drafted Marcus Peters in the first round, so they don't necessarily have a glaring need at that position right now. So if the Eagles can give him decent money, maybe, just maybe, they can, get another cornerback to go opposite Maxwell, and then you can put Carroll in the slot, so you at least have some good starting caliber players. And see, this is where the free agency class for wide receivers is kind of, it's difficult to gauge because there are some pretty decent names out there, but I don't know if a lot of them leave. Jeffrey, I do not see leaving, unless a team like the Eagles or the Browns or the Chargers, if they want to throw $100 million at him, then that might be how you get him. But if you go out there and just give him a $50 million deal, he'll probably stay with the Bears, because the Bears will probably match that. Especially how much value he brings to this type of team. But the wide receivers at this point are just, they're not really bringing, there's not a lot of studs, wideouts out there. You got a guy like a Marvin Jones, who's a number 2 besides A.J. Green, a guy who can make plays, but doesn't have that number 1 role yet. He's not a guy that is going to put up 15, 1,600 yards. It's if wide receiver at this point may be the way that you go in terms if you want a stud wide receiver. And I don't think that this team eyes Aguilar and Matthews as two number one studs that are each going to get you 1,600 yards and both be Hall of Fame players. Now, I may be wrong on that aspect. But there are a lot of good wide receivers in this draft that the Eagles can look at. Laquan Treadwell is the first one. That guy, he was hurt a majority of last year to a bad injury to his leg. He's come back strong now, and he's the number one wideout, to be honest, out there. You got a Corey Coleman from Baylor right now, who I absolutely love, who I think can be an Odell Beckham type of guy, and not Odell Beckham in terms of the way he can catch, but his size, his speed, the way he plays. He can kind of be a Jarvis Landry then. That's a better way to compare him to. I think he's kind of like that. A guy that can play in the slide, a guy that can play outside, a guy that can be a number 1, 2, or 3, depending on what you need him to be. I think that would be a good value, and you don't probably need to get him in the first round. You could probably trade in the second, maybe third, depending on if teams want him, and get him. Mike Thomas is another guy. He's one of those receivers that is 6'3", 6'4", about 210 pounds. A guy that can make a lot of good plays. But like I said earlier, this draft class, when it comes to receivers, outside linebackers, and quarterbacks, it's a very deep class. But you don't have that one superstar. You don't have that Amari Cooper. You don't have that Andrew Luck. You don't have that Von Miller. You don't have these type of guys. You have guys that are first round picks. You have guys that can make plays on the offense. You have guys that can be starters on probably any team and are going to be first round picks. But they don't have that star quality that you would be willing to trade up to get. And that's one of the main things. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a scouting report as I usually try to do each week. And today's player is Connor Cook. Now, if anybody doesn't know who he is the quarterback for Michigan State, a team who right now is the number 3 team in the nation and will be playing Alabama in a few weeks. And this is where his draft stock can either just fall or he can become a top 10 pick. Because if he somehow beats Alabama and goes on to play either Clemson or Oklahoma and wins that game, that might make you a top 10 pick. Especially considering that there are a few teams who can use a quarterback at this point. The Browns could use one. The Texans could use one. The Eagles could use one. The Cowboys, I know, with Tony Romo, they could probably use one. There are a bunch of teams that have a top 10 pick that could use a pick on a quarterback. So this is a guy that has size. He's 6'3", probably about 220, 225 pounds. Is a guy that he has a lot of good things about him. But he also has a few things that he might need to improve if he wants to be a top 10 pick, especially going into this next game, playing one of the best defenses right now. So, the guy can make every throw. The guy is a mobile player. He can play in a lot of schemes. He is somewhat of a leader because he made this team a top 3 team. This wasn't a team that before him was the number 1 team in college football. So he helped this team various years. And he started a lot of his time at Michigan State. So this isn't a one-year guy that came in for 5 games and became a one-year wonder who nobody knows. He's been playing for 2-3 years. And he's a guy that can control a team. He's a guy that you can give a captain patch to and say, you're going to be one of the leaders on our team. You're going to be one of the faces of our team, and you would probably have confidence in doing that. But at the same time, there are a few things that he needs to improve on. His decision making at this point is a little out there. His decision making, his completion percentage, I think at this point, it's good, but he doesn't have that Andrew Luck RG3 type of arm. And that's one of the big things. I think he can make every throw, but he doesn't have that 60-yard cannon for an arm that some quarterbacks have. So he's not going to give you 7,000 yards. He could probably give you 3,500, maybe even 4,000 yards, depending on which team that he plays for. His decision-making is a little spotty right now, but if he improves on certain facets of his game at this point, he can be a guaranteed locked first-round pick, and probably a top half of the draft pick. So he might go anywhere from 1 to 16. I don't think he'll necessarily go 1, just because I don't think any team will invest a number 1 overall pick on him right now. But I think that he's definitely going to be a first-round pick. I think he's sort of like an Andy Dalton type player at this point. Whereas Dalton, he's not the superstar top 5 quarterback that is Cam Newton, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. He's not in that level yet. But he's a guy that can make every play, that can win games, that can be a leader on your team. He just doesn't have that X factor being a superstar top 5 quarterback in the NFL at this point yet. Now, for the past 54 minutes or so, however long it's been on this show, I've been kind of mellow. I've kind of been a little relaxed. I didn't have to talk about the Eagles losing because they won. So it's been a pretty good week. But see, now this is where I need to let off a little steam. Because what I don't understand, and I talked about this a few weeks back, with the 76ers right now have won one game. I think. One game. And they won it against the Lakers, who have their pick. And I'm not going to... This isn't a rant on the Sixers team. This isn't a rant on any particular fan or anybody in the media. So it's not... I'm not bashing any one person. What I do not understand are the people... Is just any... I don't even know what to say at this point, because everybody wants to complain about, well, the Sixers are losing games. They're tanking. It's been 3 years. Oh, all this and all that. Fine. I understand you're tired of seeing teams lose. I get it. I know that this year is hard. The Flyers are here and there. The Eagles, they haven't lived up to their expectations. The Phillies haven't started yet, but they're kind of rebuilding at this point. And the Sixers are rebuilding too. But at what point are you just like, I don't get it. It's 3 years in. Why are you giving up now? Why is it, oh, well, it's on year 3 or 4 of Sam Hinkie's master plan? Well, they need to start to win games. Do you know what? Fine. I will agree. Let them win games. Let the Sixers win 30 games. And when they get the number 6 pick and they don't get a guy like Ben Simmons, and Ben Simmons goes to another team and becomes a superstar player, a guy that the Sixers could have had, I don't want to hear that the Sixers should have lost out to get a guy like him. Because that's what I'm tired of. I get it. You want a playoff team. That's fine. If you want a number 8 seed that won't be able to attract any LeBron James or Kevin Durant type of talent, and you want them to lose out in the first or second round, fine. If that's what you want, you can be your own fan. Each fan is entitled to their own opinion. I'm not bashing that. But don't sit here and tell me that, well, the Sixers are the only team that's ever done this, and they had Evan Turner and Drew Holiday and Thaddeus Young and Spencer Hawes. All they need to do was sign a LeBron James, and they would have been an NBA title contender. Woohoo! That's not going to happen. I'm taking Okafor, Noel, Embiid if he can come back, Saric if he comes over from next year, and the potential of getting upwards of 4 first-round picks, which I know probably will not happen at this point. But if you can at least get 1 or 2 first-round picks that can become superstar players, and you can build this team for the next 2 or 3 years that can be a championship contender for the next 10, I will take the 2 or 3 losing years. Then watching a middle-of-the-pack team go out and play okay and win 40 games and make a 7th or 8th seed and then get knocked down in the first round and then, they won't attract any top talent. And last time I checked, unless you're the Miami Heat or the Lakers, most teams in the NBA that have won titles have built through the draft. The San Antonio Spurs did it. The Thunder did it. Even though they didn't win an NBA title just yet, they're one of the top teams. The Golden State Warriors did it. The Cavaliers did it. Even though they haven't won yet, they did it. All these teams did it. And I don't understand why people just want to have a middle-of-the-pack team. Why? Because so they can be an 8th seed? So that you can see a team win? I'd rather watch Ben Simmons throw a pass to Okafor or Embiid and be a 50-60 win team 5 years from now and be a number 1 or number 2 seed, if that could actually happen, than have a middle-of-the-pack team go out there every single year with talent that isn't of superstar quality, let's just say. I don't get it. And I can't stand bandwagon fans that want to sit here and say, I'm on the Sam Hinkie bandwagon. I agree with what they do. And then they lose 80 games or 70 games or 60 games, and it's year 3. I don't know why they're doing this. The New York Knicks traded away talent too. And they got Kristaps Porzingis, who right now looks like a pretty dang good player for him. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Is that unless you have superstar talent already on your team and you can sign a free agent superstar, that rarely happens, a LeBron James, a Kevin Durant, a LaMarcus Aldridge, then fine. But until then, you have to build through the draft. Because all these guys are going to be playing with each other for the next 7 to 8 years. They're not going to be 30 when Ben Simmons comes. I feel a lot better now since I got that off my shoulders here. Because I just don't understand why some people want to see a middle-of-the-pack team. I get you want to see a team win in this city. Great. But I'd rather see a championship contending team than a middle-of-the-pack team. So that's all I got to say about that. I want to thank everybody for listening in today. I will try to be back on Friday at 9 a.m. You're listening to 98.5 WNEW LP Aston.